And, what's happened here today kind of, I don't know if you'd say worked out, but it went full circle. I was in office maybe about 5 years when the tragedy happened and the murder happened in Chaplin. And I remember it was a shocking moment for me. I mean, I was surprised, for example, the length of time it took the trooper to get, when he received the 911 call till he arrived at the scene, which I think was 19 or 20 minutes. And then we delved into it a little further and we found that, well, it wasn't the trooper's fault. I mean, it's just that the coverage area is large, that there's not a lot of troopers on, and that the roads, of course, in eastern Connecticut are not the easiest to move around on. You can only go a certain speed and stay safe. So then we started looking to staffing for state police, and as a result of that murder, the state legislature, for the first time to my knowledge, got into the business of setting a standard of how many troopers should serve the state of Connecticut. So it was a direct result of Heather Messenger's murder that this came about. And then just by chance, the family is here from Illinois because there was a hearing this morning of the Psychiatric Security Review Board, which they attended. And so then they were willing to come up here and address the issue with us because they have problems not only with the state police staffing, but also with access to the review board and how difficult it is, in their view, to get the case of the victim in front of the review board. It seems like the perpetrator has easier access than the victim's family. And I don't know about you, but that's upside down to me and backwards. So that's one of the things we're here to talk about today. And what I'd like to do is just, if Representative Mashinsky and Senator Kissel would like to say a word.
First of all, I'd like to applaud Senator Guglielmo for calling this press conference and highlighting this issue. He's done a fabulous job. I'm completely in support of his efforts to make sure that the constitutional rights, and here in Connecticut we have constitutional rights for victims' families, that those are adhered to. And if we need to make some efforts to try to make sure that that is followed before the Psychiatric Security Review Board, we will begin those efforts. And it's my intention to talk to the state's victim advocate regarding this issue as this moves forward. I also very encouraged the legislature has asked us to, as co-chairs and the Committee of Program Review and Investigation, to look at state trooper staffing here in Connecticut. We're just in about 15 minutes to go back into our public hearing regarding the results of our crack staff's review of trooper staffing here in Connecticut. But clearly, Senator Guglielmo pointed out that in some of our rural parts of our state, with twisting, winding roads and difficult terrain and staffing levels as they currently are, the response times for state troopers to matters where life and death is in the balance is problematic. And it may just come down to dollars, but it may become to shifting staffing levels from one part of the state to another. We're looking at all of those options, but clearly one of the things that the Program Review and Investigation staff has pointed out, that in eastern Connecticut, some of these rural areas, there is actually an increase in the incidence of reported domestic violence incidents, and clearly the Messenger case falls into that category. And so when there is a report of domestic violence, you don't know if it's just a strong argument or if someone's life is in the balance and every second counts. And so with that, I'm very supportive of Senator Guglielmo, very sympathetic and supportive of the family and their efforts that they've made. And I'd like to turn it over for some comments to my co-chair, Representative Mary Mashinsky, co-chair of Program Review and Investigations.
Thank you, Senator, and I'm here also to support Senator Guglielmo in his efforts for victims' rights, but also in PRI, we're the data-driven committee, and we look at the state's resources and are they best being deployed or could we be more efficient. And one of the things we hope to do with our study, and then legislation perhaps may come from the study, is determine if we have sufficient state police, do we have sufficient numbers that we can always send 2 troopers at a time to a domestic violence scene, because they are potentially violent scenes. We want to protect the troopers as well as the potential victims of domestic violence. One of the solutions may be not simply to change the number, but to redeploy them or to shift them as demographic shifts occur in the state. I know in New York City, that's the way they do business now with the police. They shift them overnight if they need to, as crime patterns change or violence patterns change. They will shift police overnight to new levels of service. And we may be looking at something like that in Connecticut too, if that's what we need to do to deploy resources to protect people the most effectively. It's just a coincidence that this family visit to Connecticut happened at the same moment as our review of the state police. We didn't plan it that way. It just happened on the same day. We actually had to interrupt our hearing temporarily so we could address this. But hopefully we'll get this addressed, and state police will do an efficient and equal job of protecting any resident, no matter where they might live in the state.
Well, I just want to thank the co-chairs of program review, and for those of you who don't know, it's an excellent committee. We have full-time staff, and we meet year-round, and a lot of the recommendations that we make are accepted in this building because the staff is well respected. So without further ado, I'd like to have the family come up, and I'd like to start with John Clare, and also we have Heather Messenger's sister, Hannah Williamson, and brother, Dan Williamson. Who wants to go first?
Whatever works for you. Thank you for having us. My name is John Clark, and Hannah and Dan are bravely here to continue this fight. I would just say, as a way of introduction, we have just come from the PSRB hearing. We have found our rights as victims once again restricted. It's very unclear what rights victims have to speak. Today I was told that I could not speak on behalf of the child who witnessed this killing when he was 5 and is now 20 and still undergoing a lot of processing and maturing and dealing with that. And when I pressed the board, I was told that he could submit a statement or he could come in person. And I explained that he was far away and that I wished to speak on his behalf, and I was told that I could not. I don't know what right to counsel is in Connecticut if it is not the permission to have your lawyer comment on your behalf. And I do not intend to put this child through the process of preparing a statement, which itself is an emotional conflict for him. The lawsuit we filed in federal court challenges this law in this state, the enabling legislation for the PSRB. They don't even have the power to contemplate non-physical injury to the public and future threat, the way they have restricted through their own rules the threat of people like Mr. Messenger to imminence. In addressing the trooper levels, which the family is pleased to do, and anything that protects the public is something that we would advocate. But there is another elephant in the living room here, in the State House, and that is the inheritance laws. Mr. Messenger inherited everything she owned. We don't even know whether he received life insurance proceeds as well, because that wouldn't be something we were privy to. He is treated as, and is, under our law, not a criminal. And so that hasn't been changed in 15 years. And now many may be aware of the case of Brett Bednarz in East Hartford. I believe, last I knew, there may be some news today, I don't know. The law hasn't changed. Whether or not Mr. Bednarz inherits his mother's assets, he can under Connecticut law. And this family finds that to be shockingly intolerable. And I would point out that if Mr. Lanza were not deceased, that would be Adam Lanza, that he would be parked next to Mr. Messenger in Whiting Forensic Facility. I don't think anybody disputes that when you kill that many people, you are insane. It wouldn't be a hard burden for him to prove. And he'd be in Whiting Forensic. And he would be inheriting a lot of guns from his mother right now. I understand he had a brother, but absent that, he too were alive. And we are hoping that given these sorts of cataclysmic events, that the legislature will listen to this family who have suffered firsthand layer upon layer of atrocity through not only the violent action, but the inaction of the law. responsively. And here, these years later at the PSRB, we're limited. Mr. Messenger's social worker commented today in front of the PSRB on comments he made to her this morning. I was barred from making comments or about what my client said to me last night. That's incongruous, and it is distinct from how we treat victims of crime. And unfortunately, the state constitution doesn't address these victims. It is a constitutional amendment that safeguards the rights of the majority of victims who are victims of people adjudicated of having committed a crime. This is a loophole we really beseech you to consider and try to fill. Other ways that you can defend the public, but thank you.
Hi, my name's Hannah Williamson. I was contacted a few years ago when the trooper law was increased, and they asked my opinion. And you know, I live in an area outside of Detroit where we have budget cuts, and we hear about 911 and people not responding. But you know, she was my only sister, and the best I have for you is I've been in the area, I know the roads, I know they're hard to drive down. I think more troopers is always a benefit. I think there's other areas that should be cut before public safety. And of course, there's no way to bring her back, but I hope that you consider that, and thank you.
Thank you for having us. I'm Dan Williamson, the older son of Barb and Dan, our parents, and the older brother of Heather and Hannah. A couple of things. It's been a very emotional day starting out so far, starting with a couple of hours under the camera for an upcoming Discovery ID program. And I have to fly back tonight, so I got all my interview and Q&A done this morning, which was a great way to start the day, having a 15-year flashback and going through those emotions. The good news is we have been able to raise a very healthy young man. Dane, he's great, and you know, we look for the upside in everything. Part of the upside here is how can we make a difference in Connecticut for future victims, and that's really why we're here. With the PSRB, the chronology available in the public record of what has gone on both years prior to that tragic evening and the years after, and the people who have stepped forward paint a picture that you know, clearly is an issue that we don't want repeated. We are fighting every step of the way at every hearing so that the PSRB is on notice that in their own in the judicial process of guilty of murder, not guilty by reason of mental defect or disease, they use the reference of 75% repeat offenders in this classic definition for the psychological disease or defect that the killer has. We want the PSRB to always act in the public's interest, not in the now no longer criminal, but now a mental health victim's interest, who is the killer of our sister. So we're going to continue to fight. We aren't going to give up. We aren't going to go away. This is too important to the people of Connecticut and to all of the people who are now on record as stating their assessments of the killer, both prior to and post-trauma. In the issue of the victim's rights, I think John has summed that up very nicely. We did not do that lightly. You know, the federal court initiative is not easy. It is not taken lightly, and I apologize to the PSRB members this morning. It's not personal against them. It's an issue with the statutes and the regulations that are promulgated from them. That's what we believe needs to be addressed under federal court order, ordering the state of Connecticut and other states to amend the laws. It's as simple as that, so that other victims in the future don't face the same challenges that we have faced with the PSRB. Then lastly, again, with the inheritance law, enough said. We're not pursuing any change there for our own benefit. That's old history. We want to, again, help lead a change so that the state of Connecticut can treat its citizens more fairly in the future. Staffing levels, I'm a firm believer in extra police on the road unless they're behind me while I'm driving. And if they spent more time in the field chasing domestic situations or other criminal activities, I would be happy. But more staffing, of course, the better. Would it have made a difference in the Chaplin incident? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe other things could have been done differently, maybe an earlier call. A lot of things went on that night. But we are supportive, and as Hannah mentioned, I'm sure when it gets time to cut the budgets, other things may be more favorably reviewed for cuts than trooper staffing levels. And so I would hope that there's a way to find the funding for an increased staffing. Perhaps a tax on the inheritance by people who kill and inherit money could fund trooper levels. Thank you for having us here, and we will be back, and we'd like the opportunity to talk with you again, probably another 6 months to 12 months, depending on the PSRB cycle, and thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to just thank the family because this is obviously very difficult. It's been a long and trying day. But if you have any questions for any of us, we'd be glad to try to answer them.